Tes tes 1 2 3 halo 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 halo. Oke, jadi ini adalah streaming dadakan karena habis baca berita tentang pengesahan RUU KUHP, RUU KUHP yang katanya itu privasi kita sudah tidak ada. Cuman karena aku nggak mau membahas lebih lanjut, jadi aku bakal hanya sedikit menginfokan saja kalau aku baru saja baca berita itu. Jadi ya, ini adalah lanjutan dari streaming sebulan lalu, 3 minggu yang lalu. Bisa lama banget ya, 3 minggu. Mangkraknya 3 minggu bro. Soalnya sebelum itu aku namatin Far Cry dulu. Dan ya, sekarang aku bakal lanjutin lagi yaitu membaca Animal Farm karya George Orwell. Dan terakhir tuh aku sudah mencapai chapter 6. Dan sekarang aku bakal baru selesai baca di chapter 5 dan sekarang aku bakal lanjut lagi di chapter 6 sampai chapter 10 karena sisa 5 chapter lagi. Oke, daripada banyak banyol, langsung aja. Syah. Lupa bentar. Oke, jadi awal itu bakal baca chapter 6 langsung karena ya sudah lama juga dan terakhir itu kalau nggak salah sudah nyampe si Snowball tuh dibunuh dari huhuhuhu sama bawahannya si Napoleon. Dan Napoleon mengambil alih kerjaannya si Snowball. Mana ya? Chapter 6. Ntar aku sambil buka buku juga soalnya aku bacanya lewat buku. Nah, nggak usah banyak-banyak lanjut aja. First, chapter 6. All that year, the animals worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week, and in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animals who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in the previous year, and two fields which should have been sown with roots in the early summer were not sown because the ploughing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee that the coming winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quality of limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and baca gimana ya? Semen, semen, sand of cement, and had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all the materials for building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this expect with picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort, what? Okay, only a vain effort. Berarti effort itu di sini ya, sekitaran sini berarti. Ah ini deh. Vain of effort did the right idea occur to somebody, namely to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals slashed ropes around these, and then altogether, cows, horses, sheep, and any animal that could lay hold of the rope. Even the pigs sometimes join in at critical moments. They dragged them with desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge to shatter to pieces below. Transporting the stone when it was once broken was comparatively simple. The horses carried it off in cart loads. The ship dragged single blocks. Even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into an old governess cart and did their share. By late, by late summer, a sufficient store of stone had accumulated, and then the building began under the superintendence of the pigs. But it was a but it but it but it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry. Waduh, telat lagi. Oke, aku lupa. Biasa, aku terlalu fokus baca jadi lupa ini. Oh iya, oh cuma blank putih doang nggak apa. Sengaja sengaja. Tanya sampai mana? Oke, aku kalau baca ulang lagi dari paragraf pertama. Uh, but it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry. And sometimes, when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a top. To see him toiling up the slope inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of of his hoofs clawing at the ground, and his great sides matted with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, I will work harder and Napoleon is always right. Slogannya, aku akan bekerja keras dan Napoleon selalu benar. Seemed to seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangement with the cockerel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the mornings instead of half an hour. And in his spare moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the side of the windmill unassisted. The animals were not badly off throughout that summer, in spite of the hardness of their work. If they had no more food than they and food than they had in Jones's day, at least they did not have less. Oke, wah kepanjang ya. The advantage of only having to feed themselves and not having to support five extravagant human beings as well was so great that was so great. What? Themselves and not having to support five extravagant human beings as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animal method of doing things was more efficient and saved labor. Such job as weeding, for instance, could be done with the thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stall, since no animal now stall, it was unnecessary to fence off pasture from arable land, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortage began to make themselves felt. There was need of paraffin oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be need for seeds and artificial manure, besides various tools and finally the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be procured, no one was able to imagine. To imagine. One Sunday morning, when the animals One Sunday morning, when the animals assembled to receive their orders, Napoleon announced that he had decided upon a new policy. From now onwards, Animal Farm would engage in trade with the neighboring farms. Not, of course, for any commercial purpose, but simply in order to obtain certain material which were urgently necessary. Urgently necessary. Sangat dibutuhkan namanya. Hanya jadi katanya dia itu akan bertukar dengan tetangga, eee, tetangga yang tentu saja untuk kepentingan perusahaan kepentingan perusahaan dan lebih simpelnya lagi untuk material-material yang memang dibutuhkan, katanya gitu. "The needs of the windmill must override everything else," he said. He was therefore making arrangement to sell a stack of hay and of the current year's work with crop, and later on, if more money if more money were needed, it would have to be made up by the sale of eggs, for which there was always a market in Willingdon. The hens, said Napoleon, should welcome the sacrifice as their own special contribution towards the building of the windmill. Next paragraph. Panjang juga nih. Okay. Once again, the animals were conscious of a vague and uneasiness never to have any dealings with human beings, never to engage in trade, never to make use of money. Had not this been among the earliest resolutions passed at the first triumphant meeting after Jones was expelled? All the animals remembered passing such resolutions, or at least they thought that they remembered it. The four young pigs who had protested when Napoleon abolished the meetings raised their voices timidly, but they were promptly silenced by the tremendous growling from the dogs. Then, as usual, the sheep broke into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the momentary awkwardness was smoothed over. Finally, Napoleon raised his trotter for silence and announced that he had already made all the arrangements. There would be no need for any of the animals to come in contact with human beings, which would clearly be most undesirable. He intended to take the whole burden upon his own shoulders. Mr. Whymper, a solicitor living in Willingdon, had agreed to act as intermediary between Animal Farm and the outside world, and would visit the farm every Monday morning to receive his instruction. Napoleon ended his speech with his usual cry for "Long live Animal Farm!" Kemana? Long live Animal Farm! Gitulah. Nggak tahu. And after the singing of Beast of England, the animal were dismissed. Afterwards, Squealer made a round of the farm and set the animals' minds at rest. He assured them that the resolution against engaging in trade and using money had never been passed, or even suggested. It was pure imagination, probably traceable in the beginning to lies circulated by Snowball. A few animals still felt faintly doubtful, but Squealer asked them shrewdly, "Are you certain that this is not something that you have dreamed, comrades? Have you any records of such a resolution? Is it written down anywhere?" And since it was certainly true that nothing of the kind existed in writing, the animals were satisfied that they had been mistaken. Every Monday, Mr. Whymper visited the farm as had been arranged. He was a sly-looking little man with side whisker, a silly satyr in a very small way. Oke, aku lupa di blok lagi. Mungkin aku bakal blok ke bagian atas dulu. Nanti aku bakal bagian blok yang bawah ya. Okay. He was a sly-looking little man with side whisker, a silly satyr in very small way of business, but sharp enough to have realized earlier than anyone else that Animal Farm would need a broker and that the commission would be worth having. The animals watched his coming and going with a kind of dread, and avoided him as much as possible. Nevertheless, the sight of Napoleon, on all fours, delivering order to Wipers who stood on two legs, roused their pride and partly reconciled reconciled them to the new arrangement. Shit, where? Cukup panjang maksudnya aku bloknya bagian atas dulu. Oke, oke, coba dari sini ya. Hmm. Their, rel- their relation with the human race were now not quite the same as they had been before. The human beings did not hate Animal Farm any less now that it was prospering. Indeed, they hated it more than ever. Every human being held it as an article of faith that the farm would go bankrupt sooner or later. And above all, that the windmill would be a failure. They would meet in the public houses and prove to one another by means of diagrams that the windmill was bound to fall down, or that if it did, or that if the, or that if it did stand up, then that it would never work. And yet, against their will, they had developed a certain respect for the efficiency with which the animals were managing their own affairs. One symptom of this was that they had begun to call Animal Farm by its proper name and ceased to pretend that it was called the Manor Farm. They had also dropped their championship of Jones, who had given up of being his farm back and gone to live in another part in another part of the county. Ex- Except through Wimper, there was yet no contact between Animal Farm and the outside world. But there were constant rumors that Napoleon was about to enter into the definite business agreement either with Mr. Pilkington of Foxwood or with Mr. Frederick of Pinchfield. But never it was noticed with both simultaneously. It was about this time that the pigs suddenly moved into the farmhouse and took up their residence there. Against the animals seemed to remember that a resolution against this had been passed in the early days. And again, Squealer was able to convince them that this was not the case. It was absolutely necessary, he said, that the pigs who were the brains of the farm should have a quiet place to work in. It was also more suited to the dignity of the leader. For the late for the late he had taken to speaking of Napoleon under the title of leader. Oh, sorry, pemimpin ya. Jadi kalau aku translate itu katanya para babi ini butuh tempat yang tenang untuk pekerjaan mereka karena otak mereka. Karena babi itu apa? Karena para babi adalah otak dari peternakan tersebut, mereka harus punya tempat yang aman gitu, quiet place, tempat yang tenang untuk pekerjaan mereka. To live in a to live in a house than in a mere sty. Nevertheless, some of the animals were disturbed when they heard that the pigs not only took their meals in the kitchen and used the drawing room as a recreation room, but also slept in the beds. Boxer paced it off as usual with Napoleon is always right. But Clover, who thought she remembered a definite ruling against beds, went to the end of the barn and tried to puzzle to puzzle out the seven commandments which were inscribed there. Finding herself unable to read more than individual letter, she fetched Muriel. Muriel, she said, read, read me the fourth commandment. Read me the fourth commandment. Does it not say something about never sleeping in the bed? With some difficulty, Muriel spelled it out. It says, "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets," she announced finally. Curiously enough, Clover had not remembered that the fourth commandment mentioned sheets, but it was there on the wall. It must have done so. And Squealer, who happened to be passing at this moment, attended by two or three dogs, was able to put the whole matter in its proper perspective. You have heard then, you have heard then, comrades, he said, that we pigs now sleep in the beds of the farmhouse? And why not? You did not suppose, surely, that there was a that there was ever a ruling against beds? A bed merely means a place to sleep in. A pile of straw in a stall is a bed, properly regarded. The rule was against sheets, which are a human invention. We had removed the sheets from the farmhouse beds and sleep between blankets. And very comfortable beds are too, but not more comfortable than we need. I can tell you, comrades, with all the brain work we have to do nowadays, you would not rob us of purpose of purpose. You would not rob us of our repose. Would you comrades? You would not have us too tired to carry out our duties. Surely none of you wishes to see Jones back. The animals reassured him on this point immediately, and no more was said about the pigs sleeping in the farmhouse beds. And when some days afterwards it was announced that from now on the pigs would get up an hour later in the mornings than the other animals, no complaint was made about that either. By the by the autumn, the animals were tired but happy. They had a year. They had a hard year, and after the sale of part of the hay and corn, the stores of food for the winter were known to plentiful. But the windmill compensated for everything. It was almost half built now. After the harvest, there was a stretch of clear, dry weather, and the animals toiled harder than ever, thinking it well worthwhile to plod to and fro all day with blocks of stone, if by doing so they could raise the walls another foot. Boxer would even come out at night and work for an hour or two on his own by the light of the harvest moon. Wait a minute, aku melihat sesuatu, sebuah pesan. Ternyata pesan yang tidak penting. Oke. Shit, god damn it. Udah sampai mana tadi? Sampai Harvest Moon tadi ya? Shit, lupa. Terlalu masuk ke dalam. Wait. Eh, mana tadi? Ini ya? Mantap. Lupa. Kebiasaan. In their spare moments, the animals would walk around and around the half-finished meal, admiring the strength and perpendicularity of its walls and marveling that they should ever have been able to build anything so imposing. Only old Benjamin refused to grow enthusiastic about the windmill. So, though as usual, he would utter nothing beyond the cryptic remark that donkeys live a long time. Ntar aku minum dulu ya. Musiknya nggak aku kasih musik apa-apaan ya karena biar fokus ke audio ke ini aja. Dikit lagi, chapter 7. November came with raging southwest winds. Building had to stop because it was now too wet to mix the cement. Finally, there came a night when the gale was so violent that the farm buildings rocked on their foundation and several tiles were blown off the roof of the barn. The hens the hens woke up squawk, skulking with terror because they had all dreamed simultaneously of hearing a gun go off in the distance. In the morning, the animals came out of their stalls to find that the flagstaff had been blown down and an elm tree at the foot of the orchard or the of the orchard had been plucked up like a radish. They had just noticed this when a cry of despair broke from every animal's throat. A terrible sight had met their eyes. The windmill was in ruins. Makanya pas waktu November datang kan lagi ada badai, tiba-tiba mereka melihat ke arah ini windmill udah hancur gara-gara kena badai. With one accord, they dashed down to the spot. Napoleon, who seldom moved out of a walk, raced ahead of them all. Yes, there it lay, the fruit of all their struggles, leveled to its foundations, the stone they had broken and carried laboriously scattered all around. Unable at first to speak, they stood gazing mournfully at the litter of fallen stone. Napoleon paced Napoleon paced to and fro in silence, occasionally snuffing at the ground. His style had grown rigid and twitched sharply from side to side, a sign in a sign in him of intense mental activity. Suddenly he halted as though his mind were made up. Comrades, he said quietly. Oh, quietly, yeah. Comrades, do you know who is responsible for this? Do you know the enemy who has come in the night and overthrown our windmill? Snowball! Oh, difitnah. Si Snowball difitnah. He suddenly roared in the voice of thunder. Snowball has done. He suddenly roared in the voice of thunder. Snowball has done this thing, in sheer malignity, thing to set back our plans and avenge himself for his ignominious expulsion. This traitor has crept here under cover of night and destroyed our work of nearly a year. Comrades, here and now I pronounce the death sentence. Here and now I pronounce the death sentence upon Snowball, animal hero second class, and half of bushel of apples to any animals who brings him to justice, a full bushel to anyone who captures him alive. The animals were shocked beyond measure to learn that even Snowball could be guilty of such an action. There was a cry of indignation, and everyone began thinking out ways of catching Snowball if he should ever come back. Almost immediately, the footprints of a pig were discovered in the grass at a little distance from the knoll. The knoll. They could only be traced for a few yards, but appeared to lead to a hole in the hedge. Napoleon snuffed deeply at them and pronounced them to be snowballs. He gave it as his opinion that Snowball had probably come from the direction of Foxwood Farm. No more delays, comrades, cried Napoleon then when the footprints had been examined. No more delays, comrades. There is there is work to be done. This very morning we begin rebuilding the windmill, and we will build all through the winter, rain or shine. We will teach this miserable trader that he cannot undo our work so easily. Remember, comrades, there must be no alteration in our plans. They shall be carried out to the day. Forward, comrades! Long live the windmill! Long live the animal farm! Lupa lagi ke bawah. Mantap. Langsung chapter 7. Ntar kita baca pesan dulu deh. Ada pesan masuk soalnya. Siapa tahu penting. Maaf, eh, ternyata masih belum terlalu penting. It was a bitter winter. The stormy weather was followed by sleet and snow, and then by a hard frost which did not break till well into February. The animals carried on the best they could with with the rebuilding of the windmill, well knowing that the outside world was watching them and that the envious human beings would rejoice and triumph if the mill were not finished on time. Out of spite, the human beings pretended not to be believed that it was Snowball who had destroyed the windmill. They said they said that it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew that this was not the case. Still, it it had been decided to build the walls 3 feet thick this time instead of 18 inches as before, which meant collecting much larger quantities of stone. For a long time, the quarry was full of snowdrift and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in the dry frosty weather that followed, but it was cruel work and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speech speeches on the joy of service and the dignity of labor. But the other animals found more inspiration in Boxer's strength and his never failing cry of "I will work harder." In January, food fell short, the corn ration was drastically reduced, and it was announced that an extra potato ration would be issued to make up for it. Then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted in the clams, which had not been covered thickly enough. The potatoes had become soft and discolored, and only a few were edible. For days at a time, the animals had nothing to eat but chaff and mangles. Starvation seemed to stare them in the face. Oh, katanya Animal Farm lagi dilanda kelaparan katanya. Karena persediaan makanan mulai menipis. Singkatnya gitu. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the out. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Emboldened by the collapse of the windmill, the human beings were inventing fresh lies about Animal Farm. Once again, it was being put about that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, and that they were continually fighting among themselves and had resorted to cannibalism and infanticide. Napoleon was well aware of the bad results that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known, and he decided to make use of Mr. Wimper to spread a contrary impression. Hitherto the animals, hitherto the animals had had little or no contact with Wimper on his weekly visits. Now, however, a few selected animals, mostly sheep, were instructed to remark casually in his hearing that rations had been increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered the almost empty bins on the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with sand, which was then covered up with what remained of the grain and meal. On some suitable pretext, Wimper was led through the store shed and allowed to catch a glimpse of the beans. He was deceived and continued to report to the outside world that there was no food shortage on Animal Farm. Nevertheless, towards the end of January, it became obvious that it would be necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public but spent all his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce looking dogs. When it emerged, it was in a ceremonial manner with an escort of six dogs who closely surrounded him and growled if anyone came too near. Came too near. Frequently, he did not even appear on Sunday mornings, but issued his orders through one of the other pigs, usually Squealer. Jadi selama Januari itu terasa aneh karena bla bla bla. Grain itu apa? Grain entah dari mana. Katanya akhir-akhir ini juga si Napoleon jarang muncul di publik karena katanya dia menghabiskan waktunya di rumah dan rumahnya itu dijaga oleh 4 anjing. Katanya dijaga oleh anjing yang tampangnya itu menyeramkan. Lanjut. One Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens who had just come into lay again would surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted. Through Wimper a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of this would pay for enough grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and conditions were easier. When the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that this sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed that it would really happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for the spring sitting, and they protested that to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time since the expulsion of Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion, led by three young black Minorca pullets. The hands made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which smashed to pieces on the floor. Napoleon acted Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hands ration to be stopped, and decreed that any animal giving so much as a grain of corn to a hen should be punished by death. The dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. For 5 days the hens held out, then they capitulated and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens had died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in the orchard, and it was given out that they had died of coccidiosis. Coccidiosis. Wimper heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered. A grocer's man driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. Oke, aku bakal break sebentar. I'm back. Lanjut. Ayo. All this while no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pinchfield. Napoleon was by this time on slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It happened that there was in the yard a pile of timber which had been stacked. There, there 10 years earlier, when a beach, spiny, was clear, it was well seasoned, and Wimper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two. Unable to make up his mind, it was noticed that whenever he seemed on the point of coming to an agreement with Frederick, Snowball was declared to be in hiding at Foxwood, while when he inclined towards Pilkington, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. Wah, fitnahnya keren ya. Fitnahan ke Snowballnya keren ya. Ini George Orwell keren sih. Ini kayaknya kalau misalnya George Orwell hidup lagi sekarang, dia bakal bakal sujud ke DPR. Oke, nggak jadi. No, 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 please, no, no, no. Suddenly, early in the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball was secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night, it was said, he came creeping in under cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief. He stole the corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beds, he gnawed the bark of the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it became usual to attribute it to Snowball. Pas si Snowball udah call it ya? Damn. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and done it. And when the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, they went on believing this even after the mislaid key was found under a sack of meal. The cows declared anonymously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome that winter, were also said to be in league with Snowball. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities, with his dogs in attendance. Oke, bentar, aku lupa blok buat tahu aku lagi baca yang mana. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities, with his dogs in attendance. He set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm buildings. The other animals following at a respectful distance. At every few steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footsteps, which which he said he could detect by the smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the barn, in the cowshed, in the hen houses, in the vegetable garden, and found traces of Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his snout to the ground. He gave several deep sniffs and exclaimed in the terrible voice, "Snowball! He has been here. I can smell him distinctly." And at the word and at the word Snowball, all the dogs let out blood-curdling growls and showed their side teeth. The animals were throw were the animals were okay. Hampir aja lupa. The animals were the animals were thoroughly frightened. It seemed to them as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence pervading pervading the air about them and menacing them with all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together, and with an alarmed expression on his face, told them that he had some serious news to report. "Comrades!" cried Squealer, making a little nervous skips. A most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick and of Finchfield Farm, who is even now plotting to attack us and take our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins. But there is worse than that. We had thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambition. But we were wrong, comrades. Do you know what the real reason was? Snowball Snowball was in the league with Jones from the very start. He was Jones' secret agent all the time. It has it has all been proved by documents which he left behind him and which we have only just discovered. To my mind, this explains a great deal, comrades. Did we not see for ourselves now he attempted, fortunately without success, to get us defeated and destroyed at the Battle of the Cowshed? Oke, katanya si Snowball itu antek-anteknya si ini, Mr. Jones. Antek-antek, gila. Wah, orang gila nih yang seriusan, yang bikin cerita orang gila sih ini. The animals were stuck. The animals were stupefied. Wait, coba aku bakal. Oh, oke. Nah, kita coba translate stupefied itu bacanya gimana ini? Always translate. Aku full volume.
Stupefied.
Stupefied. Oke. New kosakata baru, stupefied. This was a week. Okay. The animals were stupefied. The animals were stupefied. This was a wickedness far outdoing Snowball's destruction of the windmill, but it was some minutes before they could fully take it in. They all remembered, or thought they remembered. They remembered how they had seen Snowball changing ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed. How he had realized that encouraged them how he had how he had rallied and encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant, even when the pellets from Jones' gun had wounded his back. At first, it was a little difficult to see how this fitted in with his being on Jones's side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his four hoofs beneath him, shut his eyes, and with a hard effort managed to formulate his thoughts. "I do not believe that," he said. Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed. I saw him myself. Did we not give him Animal Hero First Class immediately afterwards? That was our mistakes, comrade. For we know now, it is all written down in the secret documents that we have found, that in reality he was trying to lure us to our doom. But he was wounded, said Boxer. We all saw him running with blood. That was part of the arrangement, cried Squealer. Jones's shot only grazed him. I could show you this in his own writing, if you were able to read it. The plot was for Snowball, at the critical moment, to give the signal for flight and leave the field to the enemy, and he very nearly succeeded. I will even say, comrades, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leader, Comrade Napoleon. Do you not remember how just at the moment when Jones and his men had got inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled, and many animals followed him? And do you not remember too that it was and just at that moment when panic was spreading and all seemed lost? Oke, kejauhan ya. Oke, tadi aku baca bagian sini. Kalau mau baca silakan ya, kalau mau di pause bagian archive-nya. Karena aku lupa karena terlalu masuk ke dalam ceritanya. Maaf ya, karena suka lupa blok ini paragraf. Now, when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seemed to the animals that they did remember it. At any rate, they remembered that at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee, but Boxer was still a little uneasy. I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor at the beginning, he said finally. What he was done since is different, but I believe that at the Battle of the Cowshed, he was a good comrade. Our leader, Comrade Napoleon, announced Squealer. Our leader, Comrade Napoleon, kata si Squealer. Oh, our leader, Comrade Napoleon, kata si Squealer dengan slowly dan tenang, dengan pelan dan tenang. I stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was Jones's agent from the very beginning. Yes, and from long before the rebellion was ever thought of. Ah, ah, that is different, said Boxer. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. That is the that is the true spirit, comrade, cried Squealer. But it was noticed he cast a very ugly look at Boxer with his little twinkling eyes. He turned to go, then paused and added impressively, I warn every animal on this farm to keep his eyes very wide open. Oke, bentar ini perkataan siapa nih? Boxer. Oke, perkataan si Boxer. For we have reason to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking among us at this moment. 4 days later, in the late afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. When they were all gathered together, Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse. Oke, bentar, aku lupa aku blok lagi kan. Ntar aku baca ini nih. Ow. 4 days later, in the late afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. When they were all gathered together, Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse wearing both his medals, for he had recently awarded himself Animal Hero First Class and Animal Hero Second Class. With his 9 huge dogs frisking around him and uttering growls that sent shivers down all the animals' spines. They all cowered silently in their place, seeming to know in advance that some terrible thing was about to happen. Napoleon stood sternly surveying his audience, then he uttered a high-pitched whimper. Immediately the dogs bounded forward, seized 4 of the pigs by the ear and dragged them, squealing with pain and terror, to Napoleon's feet. The pigs' ears were bleeding. The dogs had tasted blood, and for a few moments they appeared to go quite mad. To the amazement of everybody, to everybody, to the amazement of everybody, 3 of them flung themselves upon Boxer. Boxer saw them coming and put out his great hoof, caught a dog in mid-air, and pinned him to the ground. The dog shrieked for mercy, and the other 2 fled with their tails between their legs. Boxer looked at Napoleon to know whether he should crush the dog to death or let it go. Napoleon appeared to change countenance and sharply ordered Boxer to let the dog go. Whereat Boxer lifted his hoof, and the dog slunk away, brushed and howling. Presently the tumult died down. The four pigs waited, trem- the 4 pigs waited, trembling with guilt written on every line of their countenance. Napoleon now called upon them to confess their crimes. They were the same 4 pigs as had protested when Napoleon abolished the Sunday meetings. Without any further prompting, they confessed that they had been secretly in touch with Snowball ever since his expulsion. That they had collaborated with him in destroying the windmill, and that they had entered into an agreement with him to hand over Animal Farm to Mr. Frederick. They added that Snowball had privately admitted to them that he had been Jones' Jones's secret agent for years past. Uh, when they had when they had finished their confession, the dogs promptly tore their throats out, and and in a terrible voice, Napoleon could demanded whether any other animal had anything to confess. Harus pengakuan, maksud pengakuan. Aduh, duh. The three hands who had been the ringleaders in the attempted rebellion over the eggs now came forward and stated that Snowball had appeared to them in a dream and incited them to disobey Napoleon's orders. They too were slaughtered. Then a goose came forward and confessed to having secreted 6 ears of corn during the last year's harvest and eaten them in the night. Then a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, urged to do this, so she said by Snowball. And two other sheep confessed to having murdered an old ram and especially devoted follower of Napoleon by chasing him round and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a on a cough from a cough. They were all slain on the spot, and so the tale of confessions and executions went on until there was a pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which had been unknown there since the expulsion of Jones. Jadi para binatang-binatang ini dieksekusi walaupun pengakuan mereka itu remeh. Wow, bajingan. Lanjut. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away in a body. They were shaken and miserable. They did not know which was more shocking: the treachery of the animals who had linked themselves with Snowball, or the cruel retribution they had just witnessed. In the old days there had often been scenes of bloodshed equally terrible, but it seemed to all of them that it was far worse now, that it was happening among themselves. Since Jones had left the farm until today, no animal had killed another animal. Not even a rat had been killed. They had made their way on the little knoll where the half-finished windmill stood, and with one accord they all lay down as though huddling together for warmth. Clover, Muriel, Benjamin, the cows, the sheep, and a whole flock of geese and hens, everyone, indeed except the cat, who had suddenly disappeared just before Napoleon ordered the animals to assemble. For some, nobody spoke. Only Boxer remained on his feet. He fidgeted, he fidgeted, he fidgeted to and fro, swishing his long black tail against his side and occasionally uttering a little whiny of surprise. Finally, he said, I do not understand on his feet. I do not understand it. I would not have believed that such things could happen on our farm. It must be due to some fault in ourselves. The solution, as I see it, is it to work harder. From now onwards, I shall get up a full hour earlier in the mornings. And he moved off at this slumbering trot and made for the quarry. Having got there, he collected two successive loads of stone and dragged them down to the windmill before retiring for the night. Wah, panjang juga nih. Oke, bakal baca yang bagian saya dulu sampai off berarti. The animals huddled about Clover, not speaking. The knoll where they were lying gave them a wide prospect across the countryside. Most of Animal Farm was within their view. The long pasture stretching down to the main road, the hayfield, the spinney, the drinking pool, the ploughed The ploughed fields where the young wheat was thick and green, and the red roofs of the farm buildings with the smoke curling from the chimneys. It was a clear spring evening. The grass and the bursting hedges were glided, were glided, were the grass and the bursting hedges were gilded by the level rays of the sun. Never had a farm, and with a kind of surprise, they remembered that it was their own farm. Every inch of it, their own property, appeared to the animals so desirable a place. As Clover looked down the hillside, her eyes filled with tears. As Clover looked down the hillside, her eyes filled with tears. If she could have spoken her thoughts, it would have been to say that this was not what they had aimed at when they had set themselves years ago to work for the overthrow of the human race. These scenes of terror and slaughter were not what they had looked forward to on that night when old Mayer first stirred them to rebellion. If she herself had had picture of the future, it had been of a society of animals set free from hunger and the whip, all equal. The whip, all equal, each working according to his capacity, the strong protecting the weak, as she said, protected the lost brood of ducklings with her foreleg on the night of Mayer's speech. Instead, she did not know why they had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind. When growling dogs roamed everywhere, and when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces after confessing to shocking crimes, there was no thought of rebellion or disobedience in her mind. She knew that even as things were they were far better off than they had been in the day of Jones, and that before all else it was needful to prevent the return of the human beings. Whatever happened, she would remain faithful, work hard, carry out the orders that were given to her, and accept the leadership of Napoleon. But still, it was not for this that she and all the other animals had hoped and toiled. It was not for this that they had built the windmill and faced the bullets of John's gun. Such were such were her thoughts, though she lacked the words of to express them. Nggak bisa mengekspresikan perasaannya. Nih. Aduh, dia ingin berharap Animal Farm dia lebih baik, kenapa dia lebih buruk gitu. Jadi dia bingung. Ah. At last, feeling this to be in some way a substitute for the words she was unable to find, she began to sing Beast of England. The other animals sitting around her took it up, and they sang in it 3 times over, very tunefully but slowly and mournfully in a way they had never sung it before. They had just finished. Okay. They had just finished singing it for the third time when Squealer, attended by 2 dogs, approached them with the air of having something important to say. He announced that by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, Beast of England had been abolished. From now onwards, it was forbidden to sing it. The animals were taken aback. Why? Why? Cried Muriel. It is no longer needed, comrade, said Squealer stiffly. Beast of England was the song of the rebellion, but the rebellion is now completed. Just okay, bentar. Aku lupa, bentar. Now completed the execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, has been defeated. In Beast of England, we expressed our longing for a better society in days to come, but that society has now been stabilized, stabilized. Clearly, this song has no longer any purpose. Frightened, frightened, frightened though they were, some of the animals might possibly have protested, but at this moment, the sheep set up their usual bleating of four legs good, two legs bad, which went on for several minutes and put an end to the discussion. So, wait, what? Beast of England was heard no more. In its place, Minimus. The poet had composed another song which began, Animal Farm, Animal Farm, never through me shalt thou come to harm. And this was sung every Sunday morning after the hoisting of the flag. But somehow neither the words for the tune ever seemed to the animals to come up to Beast of England. Chapter 8. Aduh, tenggorokanku udah mulai kering ya. Tenggorokanku udah mulai kering, Ci. Masih ada berapa halaman lagi? 35 halaman. Lanjut. A few days later, when the terror caused by the execution had died down, some of the animals remembered, or thought they remembered, that the sixth commandment decreed, "No animal shall kill any other animal," and though no one cared to mention it in the hearing of the pigs or the dogs, it was felt that the killings which had taken place did not square with this. Clover asked Benjamin to read her the sixth commandment, and when Benjamin, as usual, said that we refused to meddle in such matters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel read the commandment for her. It ran, "No animal shall kill any other animal without cause." What? Somehow or other, the last two words had slipped out of the animal's memory memory, but they saw now that the commandment had not been violated, for clearly there was good reason for killing the traitors who had leagued themselves with Snowball. Thro- Throughout the year, the animals worked even harder than they had worked in the previous year to rebuild the windmill with walls twice as thick as before, and to finish it by the appointed date, together with the regular work of the farm, was a tremendous labor. There were times when it seemed to be animals that they worked longer hours and fed no better than they had done in John's day. On Sunday morning, Squealer, holding down a long strip of paper with his trotter, would read would read out would read out to them list of figures proving that the production of every class of foodstuff had increased by 200%, by 200%, 300%, or 500%, as the case might be. The animals saw no reason to disbelieve him, especially as they could no longer remember very clearly what conditions had been like before the rebellion. All the same, there were days when they felt that they would sooner have had less figures and more food. Ada sesuatu nih, kayak dimension gitu, dan beneran dimension. Sebentar ya. Apa nih? Temanku ngirim apa ini? Oke, lanjut. Ternyata temanku ngirim yang sesuatu yang nggak penting ya, nggak penting. All orders were now issued through Squealer or one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself was not seen in public as often as once in a fortnight. When he did appear, he was attended not only by his retinue of dogs, but by a black cockerel who marched in front of him and acted as a kind of trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo, 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 cock-a-doodle-doo. Nggak tahu tuh nanya gimana. Before Napoleon spoke, even in the farmhouse, it was said Napoleon inhabited separate apartments from the others. He took his meals alone with two dogs to wait upon him, and always ate from the derby dinner with, with the crown derby dinner service, which had been in the glass cupboard in the drawing room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthday, as well as on the other two anniversaries. Napoleon was now never spoken of simply as Napoleon. He was always referred to in formal style as our leader, Comrade Napoleon, and the pigs like to invent for him such titles as Father of all animals, Terror of mankind, Protector of the sheepfold, Duckling's friend, and the like. In his speeches, Squealer will talk with the tears rolling down his cheeks of Napoleon's wisdom, the goodness of his heart, and the deep love he bore to all animals everywhere, and even to all animals everywhere, even and especially the unhappy animals who still lived in ignorance and slavery on other farms. It had become usual to give Napoleon the credit for every successful achievement and every stroke of good fortune. You would often hear one hand remark to another. Under the guidance of our leader, Comrade Napoleon, I have laid 5 eggs in 6 days. Or two cows enjoying a drink at the pool would exclaim, "Thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, how excellent this water tastes!" Taste, tastes. The general feeling on the farm was well expressed in a poem entitled "Comrade Napoleon," which was composed by Minimus and which ran as follows. Oke, ini mungkin yang ini nggak akan aku baca, cuman karena aku nggak tahu nadanya kayak gimana. Friends of the fatherless, fountain of the happiness. Friends of the fatherless, fountain of happiness. Lord of the well back, oh how my soul is on fire when I guess right. Calm and commanding eye, like the sun in the sky, comrade Napoleon. Thou art the giver of all the day's greatest love. Full of battle twice a day, clean straw to roll. Clean straw to roll upon every piece, great or small. Sleeps at peace in the stall. Though watches overall, comrade Napoleon, I had a sucking pig. Ere he had grown as big, even as a print bottle or as a rolling pin. He should have learned to be faithful and truly. Yes, his first week should be Comrade Napoleon. Itu kok nadanya nggak salah sih. Oke, lanjut. Ngarang sendiri, cringe sendiri, sialan. Keren. Bentar, streamingku udah mulai sih. Udah mulai belum sih? Apa mati tiba-tiba? Oh, enggak aman. Oke, lanjut. Napoleon approved of his poem and caused to be Napoleon approved of his poem and caused it to be inscribed on the wall of the big barn at at the opposite end of the seventh commencement. It was surmounted by a portrait of Napoleon in profile, executed by a squiller in white paint. In white paint. Minu, okay. Fucking hell. Meanwhile, through the agency of Whymper, Napoleon was engaged in complicated negotiations with Frederick and Pilkington. The pile of timber, the pile of timber was still unsold. Of the two, Frederick was the more anxious to get hold of it, but he would not offer a reasonable price. At the same time, there were renewed rumors that Frederick and his men were plotting to attack Animal Farm and to destroy the windmill. The building of which had aroused furious, furious jealousy in him. Snowball was known to be still skulking on the Pinchfield farm. In the middle of the summer, the animals were alarmed to hear that three hens had come forward and confessed that inspired by Snowball, they had entered into a plot to murder Napoleon. They were executed immediately, and fresh precautions of Napoleon's safety were taken. Four dogs guarded his bed at night, one at each corner, and a young pig named Pink Eye was given the task of tasting all his food before he ate it, lest lest it should be poisoned. Oke. Jadi karena si anaknya itu harus nyicipin dulu takutnya ada racun. Ini kayak kerajaan-kerajaan lagi nih. Harus nyicipin dulu takutnya ada racun untuk pemimpinnya gitu. At about the same time, it was given out that Napoleon had arranged to sell the pile of timber to Mr. Pilkington. He was also going to enter into a regular agreement for the exchange of certain products between Animal Farm and Foxwood. The relation between Napoleon and Pilkington, though they were only conducted through Whymper, were now almost friendly. The animals distrusted Pilkington as a human being, but greatly preferred him to Frederick, whom they both feared and hated. As the summer wore on and the windmill neared completion, the rumors of an impending treacherous attack grew stronger and stronger. Frederick, it was said, intended to bring against them 20 men, all armed with guns, and he had already bribed the magistrates and police. What the hell? Wait a minute. Oke, lanjut. Gak penting lah. Ya, terus sampai mana lagi? Oke, saya ingatku itu kalau nggak salah sampai sampai the question apa ya? Bring against some 20 men all are. Oke, sampai ini berarti. Sampai polis tadi ya. So that if he could once to get hold of the title deeds of Animal Farm, they would ask no question. Moreover, terrible stories were leaking out from Pinchfield about the cruelties that Frederick practiced upon his animals. He had flogged an old horse to death. He starved his cows. He had killed a dog by throwing it into the furnace. He amused himself in the evenings by by making cocks fight with splinter of razor blade tied to their spurs. The animals' blood boiled with rage when they heard of these things being done, these things being done to their comrades. Shaw. Mana lagi? Uh, Being things being done to their comrades, and sometimes they clamored to be allowed to go out in a body and attack Pinchfield Farm, drive out the humans and set the animals free. But Squealer counseled them to avoid rash action and trust in Comrade Napoleon's strategy. Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to run high. One Sunday morning, apa? Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to run high. One Sunday morning, Napoleon appeared in the barn and explained that he had never at any time contemplated selling the pile of timber to Frederick. He considered it beneath his dignity. He said to have dealings with scoundrels of that description. The pigeons who were still sent out to spread tidings of the rebellion were forbidden to set foot anywhere on Foxwood, and were also ordered to drop their former slogan of "Death to Humanity" in favor of Death to Frederick. In the late summer, yet another of Snowball's machination was laid bare. The wheat crop, the wheat crop was full of weeds, and it was discovered that on one of his nocturnal visits, Snowball had mixed wheat seeds with the seed corn. A gander a janitor who had been privy to the plot had confessed his guilt to Squealer and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade berries. The animals now also learned that Snowball had never, as many of them had believed, hitherto, hitherto received the order of Animal Hero First Class. This was merely a legend which had been spread some time after the Battle of Cowshed by Snowball himself. So far for being decorated, he had been censured that showing cowardice in the battle. Once again, some of the animals heard this with a certain bewilderment, but Squealer was soon able to convince them that their memories had been at fault. Coba baca bagian atas dulu. In the autumn, by a tremendous exhausting effort, for the harvest had to be gathered at almost the same time, the windmill was finished. The machinery had still to be installed, and Wimper was negotiating with the purchase of it. But the structure was completed. In the teeth of every difficulty, despite of inexperience, of primitive implements, of bad luck and Snowball's treachery, the work hard, the work hard been finished. The work, mana deh? The work had been finished pun- punctually, punctually to the very day. Tired out but proud, the animals walked round and round their masterpiece, which appeared even more beautiful in their eyes than when it had been built the first time. Moreover, the walls were twice as thick as before. Nothing short of explosive would lay them low this time. And when they thought of how they had labored, what discouragement they had overcome, and the enormous difference that would be made on their lives when when the sails were turning and the dynamos running. When they thought of all this, their tiredness forsook them, and they gamboled round and round the windmill, uttering cries of triumph. Napoleon himself, attended by his dogs and his cockerel, came down to inspect the completed work. He personally congratulated the animals on their achievement and announced that the mill would be named Napoleon Mill. 2 days later, the animals, oke, bentar, lupa aku blok. Buat tahu, aku baca yang mana? Karena aku bacanya di buku, bukan di PDF-nya. Aku ada bukunya soalnya. Real original dari nulis klasik. 2 days later, the animals were called together for a special meeting in the barn. They were struck dumb with surprise when Napoleon announced that he had sold the pile of timber to Frederick. Tomorrow, Frederick's wagons would arrive and begin carrying it away. Throughout the whole period of his seeming friendship with Pilkington, Napoleon had really been in a secret agreement with Frederick. Diam-diam membuat kesepakatan sama si Frederick. All relations with Foxwood had been broken off. Insulting messages had been sent to Pilkington. The pigeons had been told to avoid Pinchfield Farm and to alter their slogan from "Death to Frederick" to "Death to Pilkington." At the same time, Napoleon assured that that the stories of an impending attack on Animal Farm were completely untrue, and that the and that tales about Frederick's cruelty to his own animals had been greatly exaggerated. All these rumors had probably originated with Snowball and his agents. It now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding on Pinchfield Farm, and in fact had never been there in his life. He was living in considerable luxury, so it was said, at Foxwood, and had in reality been a pensioner of Pilkington for 2 years. 2 years passed. The pigs were in ecstasies over Napoleon's cunning. By seeming to be friendly with Pilkington, he had forced Frederick to raise his price by 12 pounds. But the superior quality of Napoleon's mind, said Squealer, was shown in the fact that he trusted nobody, not even Frederick. Frederick had wanted to pay for the timber with something called a cheque for the cheque, cheque, which it seemed was a piece of paper with a promise to pay written upon it. But Napoleon was too clever for him. He had demanded payment in real £5 notes, which were to be handed before the timber was removed. Already Frederick had paid up, and the sum he had paid was just enough to buy the machinery for the windmill. Meanwhile, the timber was being carted away at his speed. When it was all gone, another special meeting was held. Oke, ntar. Lupa. Meanwhile, the timber was being carted away at high speed. When it was all gone, another special meeting was held in the barn for the animal to inspect Frederick's banknotes. Smiling be, smiling beatifically Smiling beatifically and wearing both his decoration, Napoleon reposed on a bed of straw on the platform, with the money at his side, neatly piled on a china dish from the farmhouse kitchen. The animals filed slowly past, and each gazed his fill. And Boxer put out his nose to sniff at the banknotes, and the flimsy white thing stirred and rustled in his breast. Minum dulu dehidrasi. Jangan lupa minum. Takut dehidrasi nanti. 3 days later, there was a terrible hula-baloo. Whymper, his face deadly pale, came racing up the path on his bicycle. flung it down in the yard, and rushed straight into the farmhouse. The next moment, a choking roar of rage surrounded from Napoleon's apartments. The news of what had happened spread around the farm like wildfire. The banknotes were forgeries. Frederick had got the timber for nothing. Napoleon called the animals together immediately and in a terrible voice pronounced the death sentence upon Frederick. When captured, he said Frederick should be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them that after this treacherous deed, the worst was to be expected. Frederick and his men might make their long-expected attack at any moment. Sentinels were placed at all the approaches to the farm. In addition, In addition, four pigeons were sent to Foxwood with a conciliatory message. Cons, cons, conciliatory message, which it was hoped might establish good relation with Pilkington. Capek juga, lama-lama. The very next morning, the attack came. The animals were at breakfast when the lookouts came racing in with the news that Frederick and his followers had already come through the five-barred gate. Boldly enough, the animals sailed forth to meet them, but this time they did not cave the easy victory that they had had in the Battle of the Cowshed. There were 15 men with half a dozen guns between them, and they opened fire as soon as they got within 50 yards. The animal could not face the terrible explosion and the stinging pellets, and and it and in spite of the efforts of Napoleon and Boxer to rally them, they were soon driven back. A number of them were already wounded. They took refuge in the farm buildings and peeped cautiously out from chinks and knotholes. The whole of the big pasture, including the windmill, was in the hands of the enemy. For the moment, even Napoleon seemed at a loss. He paced up and down without a word, his tail rigid and twitching. Wistful glances were sent in the direction of Foxwood. If Pilkington and his men would help them, the day might yet be won. But at this moment, the four pigeons who had been sent out on the day before returned, one of them bearing a scrap of paper from Pilkington. On it was penciled the words, serves you right. Oh, maksudnya apa itu? Nggak ngerti. Meanwhile, Frederick and his men had halted about the windmill. The animals watched them, and a murmur of dismay went round. Two of the men had produced a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They were going to knock the windmill down. Impossible! cried Napoleon. We have built the walls far too thick for that. They could not knock it down in a week, comrades. But Benjamin was watching the movements of the men intently. The two with the hammer and the crowbar were drilling a hole near the base of the windmill. Slowly, and with an air almost of amusement, Benjamin nodded his long muzzle. I thought so, he said. Do you not see what they are doing? In another moment, they are going to pack blasting powder into that hole. Terrified, the animals waited. Lupa lagi. Tadi baca sini ya. Oke. Terrified, the animals waited that it was impossible. It was impossible to venture out of the shelter of the buildings. After a few minutes, the men were seen to be running in all directions. Then there was a deafening roar. The pigeons swirled into the air, and all the animals except Napoleon flung themselves flat on their bellies and hid their face. When they got up again, a huge cloud of black smoke was hanging where the windmill had been. Slowly the breeze of lifted it away. The windmill had ceased to exist. Jadi windmillnya tuh di blar blar blar. Maaf. At this night, the animals' courage returned to them. The fear and despair they had felt a moment earlier were drowned in their rage against this file. Temanku ngirim apa sih ini? Kayak penting banget. Wow. Lanjut. Gak penting ya, Pak. Terus apa tadi? Oke, aku bakal baca ulang dari kalimat pertama ya. At, at this sight, the animals' courage returned to them. The fear and despair they had felt a moment earlier were drowned in their rage against this vile, contemptible act. A mighty cry for vengeance went up, and without waiting for the further orders, they charged forth in a body and made straight for the enemy. This time they did not heed the cruel pellets that swept over them like hail. It was a savage, bitter battle. The men fired again and again, and when the animals got to close quarters, lash out with their sticks and their heavy boots. A cow, three sheep, and two geese were killed, and nearly everyone was wounded. Even Napoleon, who was directing operation from the rear, had the tip of his tail chipped by a pellet. But the men did not go unscathed either. Three of them had their heads broken by blows from boxers' hoofs. Another was gored in the belly by a cow horn. Other had his trousers nearly torn off by Jesse and Bluebell. And when the 9 dogs of Napoleon's own bodyguard, whom he had instructed to make a detour under cover of the hedge, of the hedge suddenly appeared on the men's flank, baying ferociously. Panic overtook them. They saw that they were in danger of being surrounded. Frederick shouted to his men to get out while the going was good. And the next moment, the cowardly enemy was running for dear life. The animals chased them right down to the bottom of the field and got in some last kick at them as they forced their way through the thorn hedge. They had won, but they were weary and bleeding. Slowly they began to limp back towards the farm. The sight of their dead comrades stretched upon the grass moved some of them to tears. And for a little while they held in sorrowing silence at the place where the windmill had once stood. Yes, it was gone. Almost the last trace of their labors was gone. Even the foundation were partially destroyed. And it rebuilding if they could not this time. as before, make use of the fallen stones. This time, the stones had vanished too. The force of the explosion had flung them to distance of hundreds of yards. It was as though the windmill had never been. As they approached the farm squealer, who had uncountably as they approached the farm squealer, who had accountably been absent during the fighting, came skipping towards them, whisking his tail and beaming with satisfaction, and the animals heard from the direction of the farm buildings the solemn booming of a gun. Blur. What is that gun firing for? Said Boxer. To celebrate our victory, cried Squealer. What victory? Said Boxer. His knees were bleeding, he had lost a shoe and split his hoof, and a dozen pellets had lodged themselves in his hind leg. What victory, comrade? We not driven the enemy off our soil, the scarce soil of Animal Farm? But they have destroyed the windmill, and we had worked on it for 2 years. What matter? We will build another windmill. We will build 6 windmills if we feel like it. You do not appreciate, comrade, the mighty things, the mighty thing that we had done. The enemy was in occupation of this very ground that we stand upon. And now, thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, we have won every inch of it back again. Then we have won back what we had before, said Boxer. That is our victory, said Squealer. Nih, ngotot banget nih. Kayak windmill hancur kayak bukan apa-apa. Bangke. But when the animals saw the green flag flying and heard the gun firing again, 7 times it was fired in all, and heard the speech of that Napoleon made, congratulating them on their conduct, it did seem to them, after all, that they had won a great victory. The animals slain in the battle were given a solemn funeral. Boxer and Clover pulled the wagon which served as a hearse, and Napoleon himself walked at the head of the procession. 2 whole days were given over to celebration. There were songs, speech, and more firing of the gun, and a special gift of an apple was bestowed on every animal, with 2 ounces of corn and for each bird and 3 biscuits for each dog. It was announced that the battle would be called the Battle of the Windmill, and that Napoleon had created a new decoration, the Order of the Green Banner, which he had conferred upon himself. In the general rejoicings, the unfortunate affair of the bank note was forgotten. Oke, aku bakal break sebentar karena what goddamn lupa di blok lagi. Oke, aku bakal sebentar karena haus. Ya kok kayak Minecraft. Lupa ininya. Damn. Kategori itu bukan game ya, harus hiburan. Dang it, dude. Oke, lanjut. Pada saat itu kenapa bukan Minecraft? Tampilannya Minecraft. Kok gini? Oke, lanjut lagi. It was a few days later than this that the pigs came upon a case of whiskey in the cellars of the farmhouse. It had been overlooked at the time when the was first occupied. That night there came from the farmhouse the sound of loud singing, in which, to everyone's surprise, the strains of beasts of England were mixed up. At about half past nine, Napoleon, wearing an old bowler hat of Mr. Jones's, was distinctly seen to emerge from the back door, gallop rapidly around the yard, and disappear indoors again. But in the morning, a deep silence hung over the farmhouse. Not a pig appeared to be stirring. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Squealer made his appearance, walking slowly and dejectedly, his eyes dull, his tail hanging limply behind him, and with every appearance of being seriously ill. He called the animals together and told them that he had a terrible piece of news to impart. Comrade Napoleon was dying. A cry of lamentation went up. Straw was laid down outside the doors of the farmhouse. Oke, ntar aku lupa. Ntar lu masuk ke cerita misalnya. A cry of lament A cry of lamentation went up. Straw was laid down outside the doors of the farmhouse, and the animals walked on tiptoe. With tears in their eyes, they asked one another what they should do if their leader were taken away from them. A rumor went round that Snowball had after all contrived to introduce poison into Napoleon's food. At 11 o'clock, Wheeler came out to make another announcement. As his last act upon earth, Comrade Napoleon had pronounced a solemn decree. The drinking of alcohol was to be punished by death. Lanjut. Ah, ah, udah banget terakhir. By the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somewhat better than by mana tadi? Oh ya benar. By the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somewhat better, and the following morning Squealer was able to tell them that he was well on the way to recovery. By the evening of that day, Napoleon was back at work, oh black. And on the next day, it was learned that he had entrusted Wiper to purchase in Wellington some booklets on brewing and distilling. A week later, Napoleon gave orders that the small paddock beyond the orchard, which it had previously been intended to set aside as grazing ground for animals who were past work, was able to be ploughed up. It was given out that the pasture was exhausted and needed reseeding, but it soon became known that Napoleon intended it sow it with barley. Langsung aja, langsung untuk sesarnya. About this time, there occurred a strange incident which hardly anyone was able to understand. One night, at about 12 o'clock, there was a loud crash in the yard, and the animals rushed out of their stalls. It was moonlight night at the foot of the end wall of the big barn, where the seven commandments were written. There lay a ladder broken into pieces. Squealer, temporarily stunned, was prowling beside it, and near at hand there lay a lantern and paintbrush, and an overturned pot of white paint. The dogs immediately made a ring round Squealer and escorted him back to the farmhouse as soon as he was able to walk. One of the animals could form any idea as to what this meant, except old Benjamin, who nodded his muzzle with a knowing air and seemed to understand but would say nothing. But a few days later, Muriel, reading over the seven commandments to herself, noticed that there was yet another of them which the animals had remembered wrong. They had thought that the fifth commandment was no animal shall drink alcohol, but there were two words that they had forgotten. Actually, to the commencement, to actually the commencement read, no animal shall drink alcohol to exist. To exist apa itu? Nggak tahu. Chapter 9, dua chapter lagi. Oke. Oh, lama banget tuh juga ya. Hmm. Oh no. Damn. Red. Shit. Ada sesuatu yang jatuh. Oke, lanjut dulu. Lanjut, chapter 9, first letter. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They had started the rebuilding of the windmill the day after the victory celebrations were ended. Boxer refused to take even a day off work and made it a point of honor not to let it be seen that he was in pain. In the evenings, he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him a great deal. Clover treated the hoof with poultices of herbs which she prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. A horse's lungs, a horse's lungs do not last forever, she said to him. A horse's lungs do not last forever, she said to him. But Boxer would not listen. He said, only one real ambition left: to see the windmill well underway before he reached the age of retirement. Oop. Ah. At the beginning, when the laws of Animal Farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, for cows at 14, for dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pension had been agreed upon. As yet, no animal had actually retired on pension, but of late the subject had been discussed more and more now that the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for barley. It was rumored that a corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. Superannuated animals. For a horse, it was said the pension would be £5 of corn a day, and in winter 15 pounds of hay, with a carrot or possibly an apple on public holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday was due in the late summer of the following year. Oke, aku bakal baca yang pertama dulu karena ini juga lumayan panjang. Meanwhile, life was hard. The winter was as cold as the last one had been, and food was even shorter. Once again, all rations were reduced, except those of the pigs and the dogs, a too rigid equality in rations. Squealer explained would have been contrary to the principles of animalism. In any case, he had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearance might be. For the time being, certainly it had been found necessary to make a readjustment of rations. Squealer always spoke of it as a readjustment, never as a reduction. But in comparison with the days of Jones, the improvement was enormous. Reading out the figures in a shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in detail that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips, and they had in Jones' day. That they worked shorter hours, that they worked shorter hours, that their drinking water was a better quality, but that they lived longer, that a larger proportion of their young ones survived infancy, and that they had more straw in their stalls and suffered less from fleas. The animal believed every word of it. Truth, truth to tell, Jones and all the stood of had almost faded out of their memories. They knew that life nowadays was harsh and bare, that they were often hungry and often cold, and that they were usually working when they were not asleep. But doubtless it had been worse in the old days. They were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days they had been slaves and now they were free, and that made all the difference, as Squiller did not fail to point out. Jadi si Squiller ini pintar ngomong ya. There were many more There were many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the four sows had all littered about, simultaneously producing 31 young pigs between them. Maaf. The young pigs were piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boy on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced that later, when bricks and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse garden. For the time being, the young pigs were given their instruction by Napoleon himself in the farmhouse kitchen. They took their exercise in the garden and were discouraged from playing with the other young animals. About this time, about this time too, it was laid down as a rule that when a pig and any other animal met on the path, the other animals must stand aside, and also that all pigs of whatever degree were to have the privilege of wearing green ribbons and their tails on Sunday. On their tails on Sunday. Waduh! Oh, 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 pegel banget. God damn. Bentar aku istirahat sejenak. Ini rebahan banget. Ah, ah, bentar tak capek dulu ya. Oke, lanjut. Akhirnya rebahan juga. Udah panjang nih. Oke, the farm had had a fairly successful year, but was still short of money. There were the bricks, sand, and lime for the schoolroom to be purchased, and it would also be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery for the windmill. Then there were lamp oil and candles for the house, sugar for Napoleon's own table, for he forbade this to the other pigs on the ground that it made them fat, and all the usual replacements such as tools, nails, sling, coal, wire, scrap iron, and dog biscuits, a stump of hay, and part of the potato crop were sold off, and the contract for eggs was increased to 600 a week. So that year, the hens barely hatched enough chicks to keep their numbers at the same level. Rations reduced in December. Reduced again in February, and letters in the stalls were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough, and in fact were appearing on weight of anything. One afternoon in late February, a warm, rich, appetizing scent, such as animals had never smelled before, wafted itself across the yard from the little brew house, which had been this which had been disused in John's time, and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said it was smell of cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air hungrily and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no, uh, but no warm mash appeared, and one what? Okay, but no warm mash appeared, and one the following Sunday it was announced that from now onwards, all the barley would be reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchard had already been sown with barley, and the news soon leaked out that every pig was now receiving a ration of a pint of beer daily, with half a gallon for Napoleon himself, which was always served to him in the crown derby soup tureen. Waduh, kering. Ntar minum dulu. Kering, kering, kering. Ini selama stream ini banyak minum ya. No dehidrasi, no dehidrasi club. But if there were okay, but if there were a hardship to be born, they were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had before. There were more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded that once a week there should be held something called a spontaneous demonstration, the object of which was to celebrate mm, the struggles and triumphs of Animal Farm. At the appointed time, the animals would leave their work and march around the presence of the farm in military formation. Ah, with the pigs leading, then the horses, then the cows, then the sheep, and then the poultry. The dogs flanked the procession, and at the head of all marched Napoleon's back cockerel. Boxer and Clover now always carried between them a green banner marked with the hoof and the horn and the caption, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." Afterwards, there were recitations of poems composed in Napoleon's honor, and a speech by Squealer giving particular of the latest increase in the production of foodstuffs. And on occasion, a shot was fired from the gun. The sheep were the greatest devotees of the spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as a few animals sometimes did, when no pigs or dogs were near, that they wasted time and meant a lot of standing about in the cold. The sheep were sure to silence him with a tremendous bleating of "four legs good, two legs bad," but by and large the animals enjoyed this celebration. They found it comforting to be reminded that, after all, they were truly They were truly their own masters, and that the work they did was for their own benefit. So that what with the songs, the procession, Squealer's list of figures, the thunder of the gun, the crowing of the cockerel, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty, at least part of the time. Whew. Wah. In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed a republic, and it became necessary to elect a president. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, who was elected anonymously. On the same day, it was given out that fresh documents had been discovered, which revealed further details about Snowball's complicity with Jones. It now appeared that Snowball had not, as the animals had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the battle of the cowshed by means of this stratagem, but had been openly fighting on John's side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human forces and had charged into battle with the words "Long live humanity" on his lips. The wounds on Snowball's back, which a few of the animals still remembered to have seen, had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. Waduh. Huh, capek juga ya. In the middle of the summer, Moses the raven suddenly reappeared on the farm. After an absence of several years, he was quite unchanged, still did no work, and talked in the same strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, and talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. "Up there, comrades," he would say solemnly, pointing to the sky with his large beak. "Up there, just on the other side of that dark cloud that you can see, there it lies. Sugar Candy Mountain, that happy country where we poor animals shall rest forever from our labors." He even claimed to have been there on one of his higher flights, and to have seen the everlasting fields of clover and the linseed cake and lump sugar growing on the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now, their lives now, they reasoned, were hungry and laborious. Laborious, was it not right? Was it not right, and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? A thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs towards Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories about Sugar Candy Mountain, were lies, and yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working, with an allowance of a gill of beer a day. Panjang. After his hoof had healed up, Boxer worked harder than ever. Indeed, all the animals worked like slaves at that year. Apart from the regular work of the farm and the rebuilding of the windmill, there was a schoolhouse for the young pigs, which was started in March. Sometimes the long hours on insufficient food were hard to bear, but Boxer never faltered. In nothing that he said or did was there any sign that his strength was not what it had been. It was only his appearance that was a little altered. His hide was less shiny than it had used to be, and his great haunches seemed to have shrunken. The other the, oth- the other said Boxer will pick up when the spring grass comes on. But the spring came and Boxer grew no fatter, no fatter, fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading to the top of the quarry, when he braced his muscle against the weight of some fast boulder, it seemed that nothing kept him on his feet except the will to continue. At such at such times, his lips were seen to form the words, "I will work harder." He had no voice left. Once again, Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health. But Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as good store of the stone was accumulated. Accumulated before he went on pension. About half the animals on the farm rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer between the shaft of the cart, his neck stretched out, unable even to raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his side matted with sweat, a thin stream of blood had trickled out of his mouth. Clover dropped to her knees at his side. God damn! Boxer, she cried, how are you? It is my lung, said Boxer in a weak voice. It does not ma- it does not matter. It does not matter. I think you will be able to finish the windmill without me. There is a pretty good store of stone accumulated. I had only another month to go in any case. To tell you the truth, I had been looking forward to my retirement, and perhaps as Benjamin is growing old too, they they will let him retire at the same time and be a companion to me. We must we must get help at once, said Clover. Run, somebody, and tell Squealer what has happened. All the other animals immediately raced back to the farmhouse to give Squealer the news. Only Clover remained, and Benjamin, who lay down at Boxer's side, and okay, and without speaking, kept the flies of him with his long tail. After about a quarter of an hour, Squealer appeared, full of sympathy and concern. He said that Comrade Napoleon had learned with the very deepest distress of his misfortune to one of the most loyal workers on the farm, and was already making arrangements to send Boxer to be treated in the hospital at Willingdon. The animals felt a little uneasy at this, except for Molly and Snowball. What? Snowball? Molly dan Snowball? Molly mati ya? Ntar aku lupa. Kalau nggak salah Molly dibunuh juga di sini. Kena eksekusi kayaknya. No other animal had ever left the farm, and they did not like to think of their sick comrade in the hands of human beings. However, Squealer easily convinced them that the veterinary surgeon in Willingdon could treat Boxer's case more satisfactorily than could be done on the farm. And about half an hour later, when Boxer had somewhat recovered, he was with difficulty got on to his feet and managed to limp back to his stall, where Clover and Benjamin had prepared a good bed of straw for him. Oke, 15 halaman lagi. For the next 2 days, Boxer remained in his stall. The pigs had sent out a large bottle of pink medicine which they had found in the medicine chest in the bathroom, and Clover had administered it to Boxer twice a day after meals. In the evenings, she lay in his stall and talked to him, while Benjamin kept the flies of him. Boxer professed Boxer professed not to be sorry for what had happened. If he made good recovery, he might expect to live another 3 years, and he looked forward to the peaceful days that he would spend in the corner of the big pasture. It would be the first time that he had had leisure to study and improve his mind. He intended, he said, to devote the rest of his life to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. However, Benjamin and Clover could only be with Boxer after working hours, and it was in the middle of the day when the fan came to take him away. The animals were all at work, weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig. When they were astonished to see Benjamin come galloping from the direction of the farm buildings, braying at the top of his voice, it was the first time that they had ever seen Benjamin excited. Indeed, it was the first time that anyone had ever seen him gallop. Quick, quick, he shouted. Come at once. They're taking Buster away. Without waiting for orders, from the pig, the animals broke off work and raced back to the farm buildings. Sure enough, there in the yard was a large closed van drawn by two horses with lettering on its side, and sly-looking man in a low-crowned bowler hat sitting in the driver's seat, and Boxer's stall was empty. The animals crowded around the van. Goodbye, Boxer. They chorused goodbye. Fools, fools, shouted Benjamin, prancing found them and stamping the earth with his small hoofs. Shouted, fools, fools, shouted Benjamin's friends, prancing round them and stamping the earth with his small hoofs. Fools, do you not see what is written on the side of the fan? That gave the animals pause, and there was a hush. Muriel began to spell out the words, but Benjamin pushed her aside, and in the midst of the deadly silence, he read Alfred Simons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler, Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone meal, kennel sub kennel supply. Do you not understand what that means? They are taking Boxer to the knackers. A cry of honor burst from all the animals at this moment. The man on the box whipped up his horses and the van moved out of the yard and a smart trot. All the animals followed, crying out at the tops of their voices. Clover forced her way to the front. The van began a gather speed. Clover tried to steer her stout limbs to a gallop, but achieved a center. Boxer, she cried. Boxer, boxer, boxer. Udah mau impress soundnya tapi tenggorokanku bubar. Hampir bubar. What the hell? Halo Bang, halo. Halo Rafaela, selamat datang. Baru lihat, ntar, maaf ya. Welcome, welcome. Au. Ntar aku minum dulu ya. Tenggorokan kering banget. Ingin personet tapi tenggorokan udah mulai ini sakit. Jadi aku kurangin dulu infusonetnya ya. Maaf. Boxer, boxer, boxer. And just at this moment, as though he had heard the uproar outside, Boxer's face, with the white stripe down his nose, appeared at the small window at the back of the van. Pertama kali ada yang stream baca cerita. Suka baca cerita Inggris nggak? Sebenarnya baca cerita Inggris, Inggris itu nggak terlalu suka, cuman karena sekalian belajar bahasa Inggris juga, jadi aku baca sekalian gitu. Kalau nggak salah streaming baca cerita udah ada deh, tapi Inggris kayaknya. Kayaknya ya, bukan di Indo emang jarang-jarang sih yang streaming baca. Kalaupun ada paling cuma bisa dihitung jari. Kalau baca cerita Inggris tadi, karena kebetulan aja punya bukunya, jadi aku baca. Aw. Jadi sedikit fun fact aja, ini aku baca baca juga di buku. Aku ada bukunya sih, cuma in facecam cuman karena kamarku lagi berantakan, tidak mau facecam dulu. Hmm. Oke, tadi sampai sini ya. Oke, lanjut ya. Boxer, cried Clover in a terrible voice. Boxer, get out quickly. They are taking you to your death. All the animals took up the cry of, get out, Boxer, get out. But the fan was already gathering speed and drawing away. But the fan was already gathering speed and drawing away from them. It was uncertain whether Boxer had understood that what Clover had said, but a moment later, his face disappeared from the window, and there was a sound of a tremendous drumming of hoofs inside the van. He was trying to kick his way out. The time had been when a few kicks from Boxer's hoofs would have smashed the fan to match wood. But what? But alas, his strength had left him, and in a few moments the sound of drumming hoofs grew fainter and died away. In desperation, the animals began appealing to the two horses which drew the van to stop. Comrades, comrades, gitu katanya. Mereka mereka berkata, mereka berteriak. Don't bentar, ini masih masih bagian blognya. Takutnya bukan di bagian blognya. Oh ya, masih masih. Nanti kalau udah selesai baca yang coba bacain buku yang lagi hit sekarang ya kalau ada. Buku yang lagi hit sekarang. Aku ada sih bungkam suara. tapi tapi bungkam suara gimana ya? Hmm, lagi yang hit sekarang sih Alchemist. Alchemist nih dari ini karyanya Sen Lin Yu cuman karena mahal. Alchemist harganya mahal, ingin beli, duitnya nggak ada. Mungkin kok ada buku lain lagi sih kalau yang lagi hits kayaknya nggak tahu sih. Ya paling cuma Bungkam Suara sih kalau yang lagi hits sekarang ya. Bungkam Suara ada cuman yang ini aku baca sendiri nggak sambil streaming. Tapi kalau sambil streaming aku paling bacanya yang buku-buku Inggrisku paling. So, kalau buku Inggris kan harus ini butuh bantuan gitu. Karena ada beberapa kata-kata juga yang nggak aku mengerti di sini. Oke, ya, lanjut lagi ya. Sampai mana lagi tadi? Sampai komrades-komrades tadi ya. Oke, mereka berteriak, "Don't take your own brother to his death." But the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize that what was happening, merely set back their ears and quicken their pace. Lanjut kak, aku sambil kerjain tugas. Oke, semangat tugasnya. Sampai mana tadi? Oke. Hmm, hmm. Sampai happening berarti nih. Barely set back their ears and quickened their pace. Boxer's face did not reappear at the window. Too late. Someone thought of racing ahead and shutting the five-barred gate, but in another moment, the fan was through it and rapidly disappearing down the road. Boxer was never seen again. Scroll ke bawah untuk biar tahu aku lagi baca yang mana. Aku blok biasanya. 3 days later, it was announced that he had died in the hospital at Willingdon. In spite of receiving every attention a horse could have, Squealer came to announce the news to the others. He said, been present during Boxer's last hours. What? Kenapa ada tanda kutip? Damn. Oh, wait, what? Wait a minute. Boom, 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 boom. Wow, ada tanda kutip nggak tahu kenapa. It was the most affecting sight I ever seen. Oh, ini berarti tipe yang harus di bawah. Side squealer. Oke, ulang ya. Tadi ulang lagi. It was the most affecting sight I ever seen, said Squealer, lifting his throttle and whipping away at it. It was the most affecting sight I ever seen. Oke. I was at his bedside at the very last, and at the end, almost too weak to speak, he whispered in my ear that his soul's sorrow was to have passed on before the windmill was finished. Forward, comrades, he whispered. Okay, he whispered. Forward in the name of the rebellion, long live Animal Farm, long live Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon is always right. Those were his very last words, comrades. Herr Squiller's demeanor suddenly changed. He fell silent. He fell silent for a moment, and his little eyes darted suspicious glances from side to side before he proceeded. Okay. It had come to his knowledge, he said, that a foolish and wicked rumor had been circulated at the time of Boxer's removal. Some of the animals had noticed that the van which took Boxer away was marked horse slaughterer, and had actually jumped to the conclusion that Boxer was being sent to the Knackers. It was almost unbelievable, said Squealer, that any animal could be so stupid. So stupid. Surely, he cried what? He cried indignantly, whisking his tail and skipping from side to side. Surely they knew their beloved leader, Comrade Napoleon, better than that. But the explanation was really very simple. The van had previously been the property of the Naker, and had been bought by the veterinary surgeon, who had not yet painted the old name out. That was how the mistake had arisen. Ini ceritanya tentang apa, Kak? Ini tentang sebuah peternakan. Jadi ini kan animal farm ya. Ini cerita tentang sebuah para hewan-hewan yang memberontak pada pemilik peternakan di sebuah peternakan. Dan ternyata hewan pemimpin baru dari peternakan itu sama aja kayak si pemilik peternakan, yaitu gimana ya, kayak intinya itu kayak kejam, cuman awalnya itu bentar aku ulang dulu ya. Jadi awalnya itu tentang sebuah, udah gimana jelasinnya? Bentar, jelasnya gimana ya? Cerita tentang sebuah peternakan di mana hewan-hewan memberontak kepada pemilik, kepada peternak, di mana si peternaknya ini udah pergi, terjebak juga. Bukan terjebak sih, lebih tepatnya ketika salah satu hewan ini memimpin, dia itu dia tuh kayak kejam, kayak diktator gitu sih. Kayak diktator di mana korup lah, pemerintah korup. Kok pemerintah korup? Kayak pemimpin baru itu kayak korup gitu. Kayak upah tidak sesuai, terus apalagi ya? Dipaksa bekerja, merubah aturan seenak jidat, terus melanggar aturan sendiri gitu. Tentang sebuah hewan yang memberontak, tapi pemimpin baru dari hewan-hewan tersebut juga sama-sama buruknya, sama-sama korup lah, rusak, sama-sama rusak. Kalau baca audiobooknya, kalau kalau misalnya keadaan negara ini, keadaannya itu hampir mirip-mirip lah sama negara ini, di mana para pemerintah suka membuat peraturan seenak jidat, terus cuma kadang nggak mau lebih lanjut karena aku ingin masih aman, karena aku tidak mau kenapa-napa, jadi aku berhenti saja, lanjut baca aja. Sampai mana tadi? Tentang politik sekarang. Iya, sekarang udah mulai jadi 1964 nih. Mirip-mirip 1964 katanya. Lanjut. Sampai mana lagi tadi? Kalau nggak salah sampai ini deh. Simple that find previously property of the maker and the berarti it had come to knowledge. Oke, berarti ada sampai mistaken bentar. Ya, bentar, kayaknya sampai that was how the mistake had arisen. Kalau nggak salah ya. But the explanation was really very simple. The fan had previously been the property of the maker and had been bought by the veterinary surgeon, who had not yet painted the old name out. That was how the mistake had arisen. Oke, lanjut lagi. The animals were animal. The animals were enormous. The animals were enormously relieved to hear this, and when Squealer went on to give further graphic details of Boxer's deathbed, the admirable care he had received, and the expensive medicines for which Napoleon had paid without a thought as to the cost, their last doubts disappeared, and the sorrow that they felt for their comrade's death was tempered by the thought that at least he had died happy. Wah, dibilang ini dong, mati dengan bahagia, mati dengan tenang, kok bahagia? Mati dengan tenang. Matamu. Napoleon himself appeared at the meeting on the following Sunday morning and pronounced a short oration in Boxer's honor. It had not been possible, he said, to bring back their lamented comrade's remains for interment on the farm, but he had ordered a large wreath to be made from the laurels in the farmhouse garden and sent down to be placed on Boxer's grave. And in a few days' time, the pigs intended to hold a memorial banquet in Boxer's honor. Napoleon ended his speech with a reminder of Boxer's two favorite maxims. I will work harder, and Comrade Napoleon is always right. Maxims. Okay. He said, which every animal would do well to adopt as his own. On the day appointed for the banquet, a grocer's van drove up from Willingdon and delivering a large wooden crate at the farmhouse. That night there was a sound of the uproaring singing, which was followed by what sounded like a violent quarrel and ended at about 11 o'clock with a tremendous crash of glass. No one stirred in the farmhouse before noon on the following day, and the word went down that from somewhere or other the pigs had acquired the money to buy themselves another case of whiskey. Final chapter. Chapter terakhir 10. Chapter 10. chapter terakhir juga. Years passed, the season came and went, the short animal lives fled by. A time came when there was no one who remembered the old days before the rebellion, except Clover, Benjamin, Moses the Raven, and a number of the pigs. Muriel was dead, Bluebell, Jesse, and Fincher were dead. Jones too was dead. What? What? Oh, okay. He had died in bread. He had died in a Brady's home in another part of the county. Snowball was forgotten. Boxer was forgotten, except by the few who had known him. Clover was an old stout mare now, stiff in the joints and with a tendency to rheumy eyes. She was 2 years past the retiring age, but in fact no animal had ever actually retired. The talk of setting aside a corner of the pasture for superannuated animals had long since been dropped. Napoleon was now a mature boar of 24 stone. Squealer could with difficulty see out of his eyes. Nanti kalau buat listening gini, lagi coba tambahin musik background kak, biar nggak sunyi banget. Musiknya sesuaikannya dengan tema buku. Waduh, sesuai dengan tema ya. Berarti tentang peternakan apa ini? Eh, mana berarti? Eh, sesuai dengan tema ya. Hmm, Syah, salah. Ntar aku cari dulu ya. Ada lu bener. Ya, oke. Aku lagi nyari juga nih. Wait a minute. Oh, campaign. Kalau tegang carinya yang tegang. Oke. Intense. No copyright music. What the hell? Epic battle. Ya deh. Wait, bentar ya. Iklan. Oh, oke. OBS ku disconnect. Ntar. Oke. Maaf tadi RTO. Gak tau tiba-tiba disconnected. Oke. Ulang ya. Berarti tadi dari ini. Uh, Napoleon was now a mature boar of 24 stone. Squealer was so fat that he could with difficulty see out of his eyes. Only old Benjamin was much the same as ever, except for being a little grayer about the muzzle, and since Boxer's death, more morose and taciturn than ever. Tapi no copyright kan? Please, no copyright dong. Kadang-kadang. Ntar ya. Wait a minute. Ini udah tulisannya no copyright. Panas nge-lag. Kenapa? Enggak download apa-apa. Harusnya. Ya kan intens. Ini kan intens. Ya udahlah, chill vibe aja lah. Jangan ini dong. Udahlah pakai kok pakai lagu yang besok. Entah itu tegang, lucu, intens, sedih. Aku kasih lagu ini. Ntar mana sih? Hilang. Maaf. Nah ini nih. Kok otomatis? Oke. Pakai lagu itu aja. Itu lagu yang bisa aku pakai setiap streamingku loh. Oke, lanjut sekarang udah masuk ke paragraf 3 kalau nggak salah. Coba cari yang agak kalem, nanti cari pas di off stream aja. Jadi kalau stream gini lagi tinggal pakai aja. Ya boleh, tapi untuk sekarang nggak apa-apa. Mungkin next stream bakal pakai ini terus sih. Next stream bakal ini terus. Kayaknya ya. Cuma kalau misalnya lagi main game atau apa, kemungkinan aku nggak akan pakai background karena harus fokus buat ke gamenya. Next, there were many more creatures on the farm now, though the increase was not so great as had been expected in earlier years. Many animals had been born to whom the rebellion was only a dim tradition, passed on by word of mouth, and others had been bought who had never heard mention of such a thing before their arrival. The farm possessed 3 horses now besides Clover. They were fine upstanding beasts, willing workers and good comrades, but very stupid. None of them proved able to learn the alphabets beyond the letter B. They accepted everything that they were told about the rebellion and the principles of animalism, especially from Clover, for whom they had an almost filial respect, but it was doubtful whether they understood very much of it. The farm was more kegedean gak sih? Enggak, udah cukup. The farm was more prosperous now, and better organized. It had even been enlarged by 2 fields which had been bought from Mr. Pilkington. The windmill had been successfully completed at last, and the farm possessed a threshing machine and a hay elevator of its own, and various few buildings had been added to it. Wimper had bought himself a dog cart. The windmill, however, had not often been used for generating electrical power. It was used for milling corn, and brought in a handsome money profit. The animals were hard at work building yet another windmill. When that one was finished, so it was said, the dynamos would be installed, but the luxuries of which Snowball had once taught the animals to dream, the stalls with electric light and hot and cold water, and the 3-day week no longer talked about. Napoleon had denounced such ideas as contrary to the spirit of animalism. The truest happiness, he said, lay in working hard and living frugally. Somehow it seemed as though the farm had grown richer without making the animals themselves any richer, except, of course, for the pigs and the dogs. Perhaps this was partly because there were so many pigs and so many dogs. It was not that these creatures did not work. After their fashion, there was a squealer who was never tired of explaining. Endless work in the supervision and organization of the farm. Much of this work was of a kind that the other animals were too ignorant to understand. For example, Squealer told them that the pigs had to expend enormous labors every day upon mysterious things called files, reports, minutes, and memoranda. These were large sheets of paper which had to be closely covered with writing, and as soon as they were so covered, they were burned in the furnace. This was of the highest importance for the welfare of the farm, Squealer said, but still neither pigs nor dogs produced any food by their own labor, and there were very many of them, and their appetites were always good. As good. As for the others, their lives, so far as they knew, was as it had always been. They were generally hungry, they slept on straw, they drank from the pool, they labored in the fields. In winter, they were troubled by the cold, and in summer by the flies. Sometimes the older ones among them racked their memories and tried to determine whether in the early days of the rebellion, when Jones's expulsion was still recent, things had been better or worse than now. They could now remember. They could not remember. There was nothing with which they could compare their present lives. They had nothing to go upon except Squiller's list of figures, which invariably demonstrated that everything was getting better and better. The animals found the problem insoluble. In any case, they had little time for speculating on such things now. Only old Benjamin professed to remember every detail of his long life and to know that things had never had been. Forever could be much better or much worse. Hunger, hardship, and disappointment being, so he said, the unalterable law of life. And yet the animals never gave up hope. More, they never lost, even for an instant. Their sense of honor and privilege in being members of Animal Farm. They were still the only farm in the whole city, in all England, owned and operated by animals. Not one of them, not even the youngest, not even the newcomers who had been brought from farms 10 or 20 miles away, ever ceased to marvel at that. And when they heard the gun booming and saw the green flag fluttering and the masthead, their hearts swelled but with im, imperishable pride. Gimana lagi nih cara bacanya? Bentar, tak Google dulu. Tak Google dulu ya. Translate. Mana tadi? Imperishable. Imperishable. Kan polanya.
Imperishable.
Oke, imperishable. Oke, imperish. Their hearts swelled with imperishable pride, and the thought turned always towards the old heroic days. The expulsion of Jones, the writing of the Seventh Commandment, the great battles in which the human invaders had been defeated. None of the old dreams had been abandoned. The Republic of the Animals, which Mayer had foretold, when the green fields of the England should be untrodden by human feet, was still believed in. Someday it was coming. It might not be soon, it might not be within the lifetime of any animal now living, but still it was coming. Even the tune of Beast of England, even the tune of Beast of England was perhaps hummed secretly here and there. At any rate, it was a fact that every animal on the farm knew it, though no one would have dared to sing it aloud. It might be that their lives were hard and that not all of their hopes had been fulfilled, but they were conscious that they were not as other animals. If they went hungry, it was not from feeding tyrannical human beings. If they worked hard, at least they worked for themselves. No creature among them went upon two legs. No creature called any other creature master. All animals are equal. Semua hewan setara. One day in early summer, Squealer ordered the sheep to follow him and led them out to a piece of waste ground at the other end of the farm, which had become overgrown with birch saplings. The ship spent the whole day there browsing at the leaves under Squiller's supervision. Alamak, telatmu. Gak apa-apa. Tidak apa-apa telat forlat. Selamat datang. Karena streaming dadakan gara-gara baca berita terbaru dari pemerintah. Langsung gue streaming kelarin hari malam ini juga Animal Farm. Sama tadi. Sampai supervision ya tadi. In the evening, he returned to the farmhouse himself, but as it was warm weather, told the ship to stay where they were. It ended by their remaining there for a whole week, during which time the other animals saw nothing of them. Squealer was with them for the greater part of every day. He said, teaching them to sing a new song for which privacy was needed. Karena butuh ini tempat privacy pribadi. It was just after the ship had returned on a pleasant evening. Setelah buku ini selesai, live literasi tidak lagi kah? Ada live literasi tetap ada, cuma ganti buku aja. Buku ini selesai ganti buku yang lain. Tenang aja kok. Aku bakal, selama aku masih ada buku bahasa Inggris yang aku punya, aku bakal bacanya. Soalnya selama streaming ini tuh aku bakal stream literasi ini tuh full buku bahasa Inggris. Kalau buku bahasa Indonesia aku baca sendiri aja. Soalnya kan kalau buku bahasa Indonesia rada. Jangan buku 10 dosa besar. Buku-buku bahasa Inggris lah yang aku punya. Soalnya kan buku bahasa Inggris kan ada 5 kalau nggak salah. Ada 5, yang satu itu Romeo and Juliet, yang mana aku udah baca sampai selesai, walaupun nggak selesai banget. Animal Farm yang kedua, ini yang aku baca bentar lagi selesai. Yang penting 10 dosa besar lah ya. Habis itu 3 buku lagi bahasa Inggris ya, yaitu Frankenstein yang English Classic. Habis itu Tales of Space, story klasik juga, English Classic. Sama satu lagi tuh kalau nggak salah ini deh, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Aku ada, cuma nggak tahu itu bukunya hilang kemana. Kayaknya hilang apa kemana gitu. Lanjut. It was just after the ship had returned on a pleasant evening when the animals had finished work and were making their way back to the farm buildings that the terrified neighing Oke, neighing. Kosakata baru tuh. That the terrified neighing of a horse sounded from the yard. Startled. Okay. Startled, the animals stopped in their tracks. It was Clover's voice. She neighed again, and all the animals broke into a gallop and rushed into the yard. Then they saw what Clover had seen. It was a pig walking on his hind legs. Yes, it was Squealer. Bentar, lupa aku bagian sini. Oke, lanjut. Yes, it was Squealer. A little awkwardly, as though not quite used to supporting his considerable bulk in that position, but with perfect balance, he was strolling across the yard. And a moment later, bang, skinmu itu cewek kak? Enggak, ini skinku cowok pak. Skinku itu cowok. Lakik. Jadi saya fun fact aja ya, karakterku ini ada dua versi ya, satu versi yang versi cewek sama satu lagi versi laki-laki. Yang lagi aku gunakan tuh versi laki-laki. Emang kebetulan aja rambutnya panjang gitu. Kebetulan aja. Emang karakter itu rambutnya panjang nggak? Walaupun orang aslinya enggak ya. Orang aslinya rambut panjang malah nggak enak. Eyelashnya cewek. Emang berdasarkan muka cewek sih sebenarnya. Selalu bawa batu bara itu pekerja Freeport kak. Ini netherite. Mau aku ganti kah? Mau aku ganti kah? Aku ganti ya. Aduh. Atau nggak usah deh. Gini aja nggak apa-apa. Itu bawa netherite. Ini itu di thumbnail waktu streaming Minecraft para pencari netherite kalau nggak salah ya. Oke, tadi sampai mana ya? Kalau nggak salah tadi itu sampai nggak usah. Oke. Berarti itu sampai he was strolling across the yard, and a moment later, out from the door of the farmhouse came along a file of pigs, all walking on their hind legs. Some did it better than others. One or two were even a trifle unsteady and looked as though they would have liked the support of a stick. But every one of them made his way right around the yard successfully. And finally, there was a tremendous baying of dogs and a shrill crowing from the black cockerel, and out came Napoleon himself, majestically upright, casting a howdy, 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 howdy. Sure.
Howdy.
Howdy. Udah punya pasangan belum, Bang? Belum. Pertanyaannya itu loh. Belum. Aku belum punya. Tadi sama mana? Howdy mana? Howdy. Okay. Majestically upright, casting howdy glances from side to side, and with his dogs gambolling around him. He carried a whip in his trotter. There was a deadly silence. Amazed, terrified, huddling together, the animals watched the long line of pigs march slowly around the yard. What? Howdy, bukan howdy aman. Pakai y, bukan pakai i. Howdy. Oh, itu sebenarnya jelas howdy. Ini howdy. Pakai y, bukan pakai i. There was a deadly silence. Amazed, terrified, huddling together, the animals watched the long line of pigs march slowly around the yard. It was as though the world had turned upside down. Then there came a moment when the first shock had worn off and went. In spite of everything, in spite of their terror of the dogs and of the habit developed through long years of never complaining, never criticizing, no matter what happened. Bang, ayam-ayam apa yang sering bingung? Apa? Ayam apa? Ayam kam. They might have uttered some word of protest, but just at that moment, as though at a signal, all the sheep burst out into a tremendous bleating of four legs good, two legs better. Four legs good, two legs better. Four legs good, two legs better. Gitu. It went for 5 minutes without stopping, and by the time the sheep had quieted down, the chance to utter any protest has passed, for the pigs had marched back into the farmhouse. Ayam cemana nih? Cemana nih? Si. Oh ya, kemarin waktu ke CF kemarin tuh sempat nemu baju bagus deh. Mandor harian, gambarnya Mandalorian. Terus saya mandor harian, gambarnya Mandalorian. Waktu ke CF kemarin kok nemu tuh baju, cuma nggak aku beli. Harganya mahal. Lanjut. The chance to utter any protest has passed, for the pigs had marched back into the farmhouse. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzling at his shoulder. He looked around. It was Clover. Her old eyes looked dimmer than ever. Without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane and led him round to the end of the big barn, where the 7 commandments were written. For a minute or two they stood gazing at the tarred wall with its white lettering. "My sight is failing," she said finally. Even I was young, I could not have read what was written there, but it appears to me that that wall looked different. Are the 7 commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin? For once, Benjamin consented to break his rule, and he read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing there now except a single commandment. It ran, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than other." Jadi kalau aku translate itu, shit, man, lupa aku blok lagi. Jadi kalau di translate itu ini semua hewan itu setara, tapi ada hewan yang lebih setara dari yang lain. Oke. After that, it did not seem strange when next day the pigs who were supervising the work of the farm all carried whips in their trotters. It did not seem strange to learn that the pigs had bought themselves a wireless set, were arranging to install a telephone, and had taken out subscription to John Bull, Tidbits, and the Daily Mirror. It did not seem strange when Napoleon was seen strolling in the farmhouse garden with a pipe in his mouth. No, not even when the pigs took Mr. Jones's clothes out of the wardrobes and put them on. Napoleon himself appearing in the black coat, ratcatcher breeches, and leather leggings, while his favorite sow appeared in the watered silk dress which Mr. Jones had been used to wear on Sundays. A week later, in the afternoon, a number of dogs carts drove up to the farm. A deputation of neighboring farmers had been invited to make a tour of inspection. They were shown all over the farm and expressed great admiration for everything they saw, especially the windmill. The animals were weeding the turnip field. They worked diligently, hardly raising their faces from the ground, and not knowing whether to be more frightened of the pigs or of the human visitors. That evening, loud laughter and bursts of singing came from the farmhouse, and suddenly, at the sound of the mingled voice, the animals were stricken with curiosity. What could be happening in there? Now that for the first time animals and human beings were meeting on terms of equality, with one accord they began to creep as quietly as possible into the farmhouse garden. At the gate, they paused, half... Oke, bentar aku blok dulu. Hampir lupa kebiasaan. At the gate, they paused, half frightened to go on, but Clover led the way in. Bang, selama live ini udah ada jeda istirahat belum? Udah ada. 3 kali istirahat. Dimana 3 kali istirahat itu aku sempat ke waiting screen, Sama yang satu lagi istirahat, aku udah bahan tapi nggak aku ganti ke waiting screen. At the gate they paused, half frightened to go on, but Clover led the way in. They tiptoed up to the house, and such animals as were tall enough peered in at the dining room window. There, around the long table, sat half a dozen farmers and half a dozen of the more eminent pigs. Napoleon himself occupying the seat of honor at the head of the table, the pigs appeared completely at ease in their chairs. The company had been enjoying a game of cards but had broken off for the moment, evidently in order to drink a toast. Sampai jam berapa ini berarti? Ya, bentar lagi paling. Jam 10 paling. Jam 10 kelar paling ini. Saya tinggal 3 halaman lagi. Tinggal 3 halaman lagi. Tadi sampai mana tadi? Napoleon himself occupying the seat of honor, the pigs appeared completely at ease in their chairs. The company had been enjoying a game of cards, but had broken off for the moment, evidently in order to drink a toast. A large jug was circulating, and the mugs were being refilled with beer. No one noticed the wondering faces of the animals that gazed in at the window. Mr. Pilkington of Foxwood had stood up, his mug in his hand. In a moment, he said he would ask for the present company to drink a toast, but before doing so, there were a few words that he felt incumbent upon him to say. It was a source. Oke, lupa gue blok lagi di sini. Dang it. Lupa mulu gue blok. It was a source of great satisfaction to him, he said, and he was sure to all others present to feel that a long period of mistrust and misunderstanding had now come to an end. There had been a time, not that he or any of the present company had shared such sentiments, but there had been a time when the respected proprietors of Animal Farm had been regarded, he would not say with hostility, but perhaps with a certain measure of misgiving, by their human neighbors. Unfortunate incident had occurred, mistaken ideas had been current. It had been felt that the existence of a farm owned and operated by pigs was somehow abnormal and was liable to have an unsettling effect in the neighborhood. So many farmers had assumed, without due inquiry, that on such a farm a spirit of license and indiscipline would prevail. They had been nervous about the effects upon their own animals, or even upon their human employees, but all such doubts were now dispelled. Today, he and his friend had visited Animal Farm and inspected every inch of it with their own eyes, and what did they find? Not only the most up-to-date methods, but a discipline and an orderliness which should be an example to all farmers everywhere. He believed that he was right in saying that the lower animals on Animal Farm did more work and received less food than any animals in the county. Indeed, he and his fellow visitors today had observed many features which they intended to introduce on their own farms immediately. He would end his remarks, he said, by emphasizing once again the friendly feelings that subsisted and ought to subsist between Animal Farm and its neighbors, between pigs and human beings. There was not, and there need not and there need not be any clash of interest whatever. Their struggles and their difficulties were one. Was not the labor was not the labor problem the same everywhere. Here it became apparent that Mr. Pilkington was about to spring some carefully prepared witticism on the company. But for a moment he was too overcome by amusement to be able to utter it. After mocking chucking, during which his various chins turned purple, he managed to get it out. If you have your lower animals to contend with, he said, we have our lower classes. This bon mot apa lagi nih? BONMOT set the table in a roar, and Mr. Pilkington once again congratulated the pigs on the low rations, the long working hours, and the general absence of pampering which he had observed on Animal Farm. And now he said finally he would ask the company to rise to their feet and make certain that their glasses were full. Gentlemen, concluded Mr. Pilkington, gentlemen, I give you a toast to the prosperity of Animal Farm. There was enthusiastic cheering and stamping of feet. Napoleon was so gratified that he left his place and came round the table to clinking this mug against Mr. Pilkington's before emptying it. When the cheering had died down, Napoleon, who had remained on his feet, intimated that he too had a few words to say. Like all of Napoleon's speeches, it was short and to the point. He too, he said, was happy that the period of misunderstanding was at an end. For a long time there had been rumors circulated, he had reason to think, by some malignant enemy, that there was something subversive and even revolutionary in the outlook of himself and his colleagues. They had been credited with attempting to stir up rebellion among the animals on neighboring farms. Nothing could be further from the truth. Their sole wish and in the past was to live at peace and in normal business relations with their neighbors. This farm, which he had the honor to control, he added, was a cooperative enterprise. The title deeds, which were in his own possession, were owned by the pigs jointly. Gatal. He did not believe, he said, that any of the old suspicions still lingered, with certain changes but certain changes had been made recently in the routine of the farm, which should have the effect of promoting confidence still further. Sudah 3 jam ya? Ya, bentar lagi 4. Iya, udah 3 jam lebih. Hampir 3,5 jam. Terus sampai still further ya? Oke. The effect of promoting confidence still further. Hitherto the animals on the farm had a rather foolish custom of addressing another as comrade. This was to be suppressed. There had also been a very strange custom, whose origin was unknown, of marching every Sunday morning past a board school which was nailed to a post in the garden. These two would be suppressed, and the school had already been buried. His visitors might have observed too the green flag which flew from the masthead. If so, they would perhaps have noted that the white hoof and horn with which it had previously been marked and now been removed. It would be a plain green flag from now onwards. Minum dulu. Mm. Ah, mm-mm. He had only one criticism. He said to make of Mr. Pilkington's excellent and neighborly speech, Mr. Pilkington had referred throughout to Animal Farm. He could not, of course, know, for Napoleon, was only now for the first time announcing it that the name Animal Farm had been abolished. Henceforward, the farm was to be known as the Manor Farm, which he believed was its correct and original name. Oke, tamat. Full. Gentlemen, concluded Napoleon, I will give you the same toast as before, but in a different form. Fill your glasses to the brim. Gentlemen, here is my toast to the prosperity of the Manor Farm. There was the same hearty cheering as before, and the mugs were emptied to the dregs. But as the animals outside gazed at the scene, it seemed to them that some strange thing was happen. What was it that had altered in the faces of the pigs? Clover's old dim eyes flitted from one face to another. Some of them had 5 chins, some had 4, some had 3, but what was it that seemed to be melting and changing? Then, the applause having come to an end, the company took up their cards and continued the game that had been interrupted, and the animals crept silently away. But they had not gone 20 yards when they stopped short. An uproar of voices was coming from the farmhouse. Kayak biar nggak bingung ya. But they had not... Kayak ulang lagi ya dari paragraf ketiga dari ini. Keempat sih paragraf keempat sih. But they had not gone 20 ya benar. But they had not gone 20 yards when they stopped short. An uproar of voices was coming from the farmhouse. They rushed back and looked through the window again. Yes, a violent quarrel was in progress. There were shoutings, hangings on the table, sharp suspicious glances, furious denials. The source of the trouble appeared to be that Napoleon and Mr. Pilkington had each played an ace of spades simultaneously. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike, no question. No. Now, what had happened to the faces of the pigs? The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. Tamat. The end. Animal Farm. Tamat. Sesuai judul. The end. Ceritanya berat kali ya. Cerita yang tentang hewan-hewan tapi kenapa berat banget ya? Damn, son. Oke. Hanya 2 streaming, walaupun setengah-setengah. Ya, jadi kesimpulannya, Animal Farm ceritanya berat banget tentang politikan ini, dimana ketika pemerintahan sebelumnya yang korup, tiba-tiba ketika pemerintahan sebelumnya yang korup dilengsarkan, kemudian para pemimpin baru ini ikut korup juga. Wow, ternyata lebih jahat ya. Ya, jadi kesimpulan yang bisa aku dapat dari cerita ini adalah jangan memberontak. Jangan berontak. Belum tentu ketika kita berontak dan berhasil menang, belum tentu akan menjadi lebih baik. Oke, jadi sekian saja ya untuk ceritanya. Aku matiin dulu. Ya, jadi untuk cerita Animal Farm seperti itu. Kesimpulannya tadi satu, jangan pernah berontak ke pemerintah. Endingnya bakal sama aja. Oke, jadi karena sudah selesai dan aku juga sudah bingung mau ngapain juga setelah ini. Mungkin aku bakal sekalian ini kali ya, uh, free talk aja sebentar. Jadi gimana? Gimana? Bentar, aku pernah coba tak. Tadi aku sempat di mention sama temanku deh. What? Tanda bansos. Ya, HSR. Sedikit ngomongin HSR yaitu currency war. Bajingan tuh. Itu event paling bangke. Coba kan coba sedikit buka Twitter dulu ya. Sebab di Twitter ada yang menarik. Cuman nggak akan kasih lihat ini karena isinya suka muncul yang aneh-aneh. Lagi scroll bawah-bawah lah, tiba-tiba munculnya begituan. Ya. What? Who? Apa ini? Iklannya aneh-aneh kan. Aneh-aneh gitu. Waduh. I cannot read. Please. Apa? Mirror. Oh, Risu ini MV baru. Apa ini? Ya elah, kepotong. Damn. Tunggu, coba baca ya. Ini soalnya beberapa hiragana. Oh, ini hiragana sama katakana nih. Coba baca ya. Gomashi. Shitemashi. Gomashi. Shitemashi. Hah? Shitemashi. Ini mah ya? Hiragana nyama itu kayak gimana ya? Kalau saya tuh mah deh. Apa? Oh. Gohoshi. Shitehoshi. Lo mau lihat apa ini? Gohoshi itu apa nggak tahu. Kasamawa. Apa ini? Naido. Oh, Naido de. Gozaru kara na. Gitu. Buat fanbox. Oke, aku mau coba Kak streaming belajar bahasa Jepang ya. Kamu kan coba streaming belajar bahasa Jepang yaitu belajar kanji. Soalnya aku masih stuck di kanji. Hiragana beberapa udah hafal pun masih ada yang kebalik-kebalik. Setidaknya udah bisa tinggal mengingat-ingat saja. Walaupun belum bisa-bisa banget. Oke, jadi karena aku sudah bingung mau ngapain lagi, jadi sampai sini aja streaming kali ini. See you next time in next stream. Goodbye.